Assalamu alaikum dear students. I welcome you to the studio of Allma Iqbal Open University. I am here to share with you some information on Compulsory English 2 for BA BS with the code number 1424 5411 9408. Today we will speak about Unit 2 of your book. Unit 2, that is on sequence. As you all know, in the last unit we have already talked about the structure of academic writing. We talked about how to organize and structure a paragraph. So before we start on with the sequence, we'll talk about the organization of the paragraph a little more and the role of transitional expressions in a paragraph. Dear students, transitional expressions are an important part of the organization of a paragraph. Transitions or transitional expressions serve as a bridge for you to lead your readers into your line of thought. There are some transitional expressions that you use which indicate what kind of a paragraph you're actually writing. For your convenience, I'll be telling you and showing you on the screen some of the transitional expressions that we normally use in various kinds of paragraphs. I'll also tell you the relationship that is there between these transitional expressions. The transitional expressions for addition are also, in addition, to, moreover, and, besides, furthermore, equally important, then, finally. Transitional expressions, for example, are, for example, for instance, thus, as an illustration, namely, and specifically. Transitional expressions for contrast are, but, yet, however, nevertheless, nonetheless, conversely, in contrast, still, at the same time, on the one hand, on the other hand. Transitional expressions for comparison are similarly, likewise, in the same way. Transitional expressions for concession are, of course, to be sure, certainly, and granted. Transitional expressions for result are, therefore, thus, as a result, so, and accordingly. Transitional expressions for summary are, hence, in short, in brief, in summary, in conclusion, and finally. There are transitional expressions for time like first, second, third, next, then, finally, and afterward. Transitional expressions for sequence are before, soon, later, meanwhile, subsequently, immediately, eventually, and currently. Transitional expression for place are in the front, in the foreground, in the back, in the background, at the side, adjacent, nearby, in the distance, here, and there. These are some of the transitional expressions that you've just seen on the screen for the paragraphs that you'll be writing. Each of these transitional expressions serve a different purpose, and you will use them as on the chart you just saw. You can see that you use these transitional expressions for the type of paragraph you're writing. If you're writing something for the sequence purposes, or you're writing about process, then you will be using the ones that come under that head. And if you are talking about place or the placement of something, then you will be using the expressions that come under the place. Dear students, you must keep in mind that these transitional expressions in a way signal connection among your ideas. Whatever ideas you are presenting to your readers, these expressions help you connect them with each other. Now, coming to sequence. Sequence, as the very term connotes, is about order. We do sequence writing in academic writing or in English when we are putting things on the paper in an order. Order can be of two types. It can be a chronological order, or it can just be about a process. When we say it is about a chronological order, by chronology we mean something that is placed in time in a sequence. It starts with past, goes on to present, and sometimes it may go ahead to future. So when you take care of the timeline and write the process as such, this is something where you're taking care of a sequence writing in chronological order. Sometimes we also take care of sequence and while we are doing process writing. Now, what is process writing? The process writing is when you are writing about a process, or sometimes when the writer tells you in a step-by-step manner how is it that a process works. So, in the sequence unit, we'll see how is it that in a paragraph you talk about things in a sequence. To make it more easy for you, I can give you a small example. Let's talk about the way stories are told, or let's talk about the way we talk about our daily routine. We say first, then, after that, and finally. If I ask you, what did you do today morning? Or if I talk to you about my own morning routine, I'll tell you, first, I got out of my bed. Then, I took a shower. After that, I took my breakfast. And finally, I got ready for work. So, you can practice it like that. Since your childhood, you have been listening to the stories that go in sequences like this. Something happens first, then another thing happens, and so on and so forth. Surprisingly and interestingly, the first remains a first and finally comes at the end, but the ones in the middle, like then and after that, can change places. So, you can say, first I did this, after that I did that, then I did this, and finally I wrapped up. Or you can also say, first I did this, then I did that, after that I did this, and finally I wrapped up. So, this is how sequence writing works. It talks about the processes that take place in an order. It talks about step-by-step procedures. So, when we talk about sequence writing, when we talk about the sequence in a paragraph, you'll be using, again, to remind you, you'll be using transitional expressions along with the other detail. Now, we move on to the two different types of sequence writing that we have just mentioned. One of them is when you are writing about a chronological order. I can give you an example. You can look at the screen for the paragraph that is there for chronology. It reads, other visitors include schools of dolphins swimming with synchronized precision and the occasional humpback whale. Before 1950, these 14-meter marine mammals were a common sight in the waters of the Great Barrier Reef as they passed on their annual migration between Antarctic waters and the tropics, where the calves were born. Then, in the 1950s, whaling stations were set up on the New South Wales and Queensland coasts, and together with the long-established Antarctic hunts by the Soviet Union and America, whales were slaughtered in the thousands. By the time the whaling stations on the eastern Australian coast closed in the early 1960s, it was estimated that only 200 remain in these waters. Today, their numbers are slowly increasing, but sightings are still rare. Now, this paragraph is a very good example of sequence writing that is done for chronological order. You see, the writer started with before 1950s, then he moved on to in 1950s, then early 1960s, and ends up by saying today. So from 1950s to today, 2018 and 19, he has moved on in a chronological order. This is how a paragraph of sequence writing looks like when you are talking about the chronology. When you're talking about, you're trying starting from the past and you're bringing it to the present, and sometimes you may be mentioning the time ahead of present, that is future. So, in a paragraph of sequence writing where you are taking care of chronological order, you have to see that you have to start with the farthest past and you move on to present, and then you may move ahead or you may close it at present, like the writer of this passage has already done. He closes it at what is happening today. The words like before 1950s, in the 1950s, in early 1960s, and today serve as transitional expressions or transitions. These words or phrases tell you that this is a paragraph of sequence writing that deals with chronological order of a certain happening or a certain phenomena. Moving on to the next type of sequence writing. That is a sequence writing where the writer is talking about a process. He's talking about how something happens, or he's guiding you step by step into doing something, or telling you how is it that a procedure is performed, or how is it that the process takes place. Dear students, you must have seen videos and audios of cooking recipes. They so many times tell you first do this, then move on to that, put this first, move on to that, cook it for this much time, and then serve it. Now what do? They tell you step-by-step procedure of cooking a certain recipe. So this is what a sequence writing is when it talks about a certain process. I'll give you a certain examples for you to be clear about what a process writing looks like. We have a paragraph here on the screen. Making chocolate isn't simple as grinding a bag of beans. The machinery in a chocolate factory towers over you, rumbling and whirring. A huge cleaner first blows the beans away from their accompanying debris. Sticks and stones, coins, and even bullets can fall among cocoa beans being bagged. Then they go into another machine for roasting. Next comes separation in a winnower. Shells sliding out one side, beans falling from the other. Grinding follows, resulting in chocolate liquor. Fermentation, roasting, and conching all influence the flavor of chocolate. So, in this paragraph, you can see that the writer has given you the process of how to grind chocolate, and he tells you first this, then this, next this. He uses these transitional expressions to explain to you the process. I'll read out another small paragraph for you to see how is it that the process writing is done. Carrying loads of equal weight like paint cans and toolboxes is easier if you carry one in each hand. Keep your shoulders back and down so that the weight is balanced on each side of your body, not suspended in front. With this method, you'll be able to lift heavier loads and also to walk and stand erect. Now here, the writer has talked to you about the process of carrying big and huge weights or something that is really heavy to be carried. So what is the process? How to keep your body? So in this, he's going step-by-step manner to tell you how is it that a certain process works. Look at this paragraph on your screen. An oyster has an irregular shape. The valves are rough and the lips hard to find. Crooked and wrinkled, the hairline crack between the valves cannot be widened with the blade of a knife. The point must enter first. Furthermore, a big chicken teeth does not fit the left hand. One must hold the animal slanting against the edge of the kitchen sink and poke around, seeking the slot by touch as much as by sight. It takes painful practice. When the knife point finds a purchase, push carefully and quickly before the oyster realizes what's afoot and gets a firmer grip on itself. Push in the wrong place is easy to mistake a growth line for the groove, and the knife takes on a life of its own. It can skid and open up your hand. This delicate work requires patient agility to find the groove, push the knife in, then slit the muscle and open the critter without losing too much juice. If you look at the paragraph closely, you'll find that the writer has told you the process of how to open an oyster. And while talking about this process, he has used the transitional phrases like first, furthermore, then, and then he comes to how finally you have opened the oyster. So students, this is how the writers normally talk about the sequence writing and process writing. This is how step by step they talk about certain processes. They talk about how certain processes take place. So when you're writing about sequences, when you're writing about certain processes, you need to have a good list of transitional expressions with you before you start writing. And you should be very clear about what steps to follow and how and in what order should you follow them. Because, to repeat, sequence writing is all about order. Wherever a certain order is to be followed, it is there that the sequence writing comes in. So you may either be following a timeline, writing about chronology of certain events or phenomena, or you may be talking about the process of how things happen or how activities are done in a step-by-step manner. The transitional expressions will definitely help you in your sequence writing, but you have to take care of the fact that if you put in too many transitional expressions without knowing their meanings and their usage, it can affect your writing, and it will have the potential to confuse your readers. It will baffle their minds and they would not be able to understand what they have actually read. So the use of the transitional expressions would be such that they must be used where they are necessary and where they help the content. So to help you with your writing, I can even give you at the end a list of certain transitional expressions that will help you in your sequence writing. You can see at your screen there is a whole list of transitional expressions that will help you for your sequence writing. First, next, then, lastly, finally, later, eventually, at last, meanwhile, in the meantime, in the end, suddenly, before long, all of a sudden, the next day, afterward, as soon as, and over time. Dear students, keep in mind that these transitional expressions, just a few that I've shared with you, they're not all. You can use these and many other transitional expressions in sequence writing, but keep in mind that they must be related to the content. There are some given in your textbook also, which you can use for your sequence writing. So, this was all for today. Just to wind up, I can tell you that sequence writing is a kind of writing where you're either talking about a chronological order or you're writing about how a process takes place. We have already talked about all this in detail. So, at the end, I'll only wish you good luck with your sequence writing. Thank you.